Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more super bonus episode today with Marc Löffler. Hi Marc, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, nice to see you again.
Absolutely. And it's a very exciting topic to talk about. Marc, who's a super active member of the Agile community. And in his spare time, he's been able to write a blog, host a podcast, and 2 books. All of this being a consultant, a speaker, and a trainer. Now, today, Marc, we're going to talk about the Scrum Master Journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the important thing is to highlight that today is a masterclass. We're actually going to dive into 2 of the main challenges that we face as Scrum Masters, and we're going to get down and into the details of how to tackle those challenges. Marc, just a quick intro. Why did you get started with the whole Scrum Master journey for our listeners to be aware of why this project came about?
So the idea for the Scrum Master Journey came when I had some questions to my Scrum Master community to find out what are the things the people, Scrum Masters in the job struggle the most. And that's more or less also the base for the Scrum Master Journey in the end. And the thing is that I found that mostly there isn't any education for Scrum Master, at least not in one thing where you just go and get anything you need. Of course, you find lots of tools and stuff all around the web, but just to have one place where you can go, where this is also meant like a journey. It's not like, okay, now you're here and then after 2 days it's over. It's more like, okay, you're there for months, maybe for years. You have the community, you have all the people you can talk to. I think that was one of the reasons to start a Scrum Master Journey.
Absolutely. And for those of you who want to know more, I'll put the link in the show notes to last week's episode where we dove into the Scrum Master Journey in a lot more detail. If you're curious, you can go to scrummaster-journey.com or to scrummastertoolbox.org/SMJ to find out more. And if you go there and sign up, you'll get a guide written by Marc on how to host your own self-retrospective as a Scrum Master. So definitely a great exercise to have, and with the guidance of Marc, who's been writing about this for many years. So Marc, in the last episode, we talked about 2 great challenges that many Scrum Masters face. Perhaps not all, but many definitely face that. And the first one was how to get my team to self-organize, right? To take ownership, to own the process, and to be proud and driven in achieving the success for their work. And the second one was the role of culture, how to recognize it, and how to help change culture. And today's a masterclass, so we're going to dive into the details of how to tackle these specific challenges. Let's start with the first one, self-organization in the team. Before we dive into the how-to, tell us a few examples of what kind of questions and challenges you've seen Scrum Masters face when it comes to self-organization in the team.
Yeah, so in the last episode, I already talked about my famous goldfish in the goldfish class, right? So the biggest struggle most of the time is really for Scrum Masters that they have a team full of goldfishes. So full of people who are not used to self-organize, who are not used to decide on themselves, who are not used to get in the spot, right? Okay, now I do something. I'm now deciding something. And they're used to somebody is telling me what I have to do. And even worse, if these goldfishes are too long in the goldfish class, they become a zombie. So they even have no brain. Yeah, so it gets even worse. And the thing is now, so the big challenge always is, most of the time you as a Scrum Master, maybe you came from a project management roles in the past whatsoever, you're used to these things, right? And the anti-pattern you can see a lot of time is that people still look up to you as a Scrum Master to do the things, to decide something, to move things forward, to go into the spot, right? And it's a struggle and a problem that, all of these important things still stay with you as a Scrum Master, like you are a project manager.
There's even an anti-pattern for this, like their mom, right?
The Scrum Mom, yeah.
And some Scrum Masters actually take on that role and start solving problems for the team without first thinking, would this now be an opportunity to help the team take ownership?
Yeah. So I have a friend of mine who's also an Agile coach, Armin Schubert. He always says, when I go to a company, I always tell them, I won't tell you the solution. I will always ask just questions and then stand up to you. And this is already one of the things you can do to get the goldfishes out of the goldfish class, right? So I call it ask the team. And I think I stole it from Joseph Perrine a few years ago. Some of you may know Joseph. Joseph was the first European Scrum trainer, and he's still active. And he always says, this is one of the most important thing to do, right? Ask the team. And if they come to you with something, then just ask back, right?
Yeah, I remember an anecdote of a team member once coming to me. He had done this several times, and as I did exactly as you said, I asked the question back, and he asked the question. I don't recall anymore what the question was, but he asked the question, and then I started looking at him, and in a moment of silence, he said, "Wait a minute, you're going to ask me the question back, aren't you?"
Yes. Or I had people, we went through the sprint backlog, and he was asking me, so what is the next task I should pick from the board? Such thing, really, really silly questions sometimes you get from team members. And then, one trick is always to ask back. But the underlying issue most of the time is missing psychological safety.
Well, let's break that down. I mean, we have a few episodes about that topic, so I'll link those in the show notes for those that want to dive more into the topic. But the 30-second description for a Scrum Master who's hearing this for the first time, what is that missing psychological safety?
So psychological safety is in place when you are allowed to question the status quo. This is for me what is about psychological safety. So without having the fear that somebody will throw something at your head, right? To get some punishment whatsoever, right? And this is what I call psychological. You can be yourself. You can ask silly question. You can ask the status quo if this is maybe still the right thing to do. And if this is in place, then you have psychological safety, more or less. And this would be the 30 seconds explanation. And it's really interesting. There were some studies in the 1960s already, right, where they went to hospitals and found out that more people are dying in hospitals without psychological safety because of patients getting the wrong medication because the doctor said this is the right medication. And then the nurses, were not allowed to re-question what the doctor was saying, right? So even if they knew this is the wrong medication, they said, no, I won't say anything because here no psychological safety in place, right? I will get punished if I say something. So more people died, right? This is really interesting topic. But as you said, you have lots of episodes on this topic. Maybe you should look into these topics here. But the thing is with self-organization won't happen if psychological safety is not in place, because people have the fear, if I do now something can go wrong. And if something goes wrong, then maybe I get problems or I was punished or the team members will just point at me for doing things wrong and stuff like that. So one of the key things good Scrum Masters should work on is to get a better psychological safety in place. And of course, this is nothing you just snap your fingers and there it is. This is something we have to work for sometimes weeks, sometimes months until it's getting there, right?
So before we dive into what we need to do to get it there, I think it's fair to say that it's not always clear whether there is psychological safety. It's also, because reality is complex, obviously, there are certain things for which there is psychological safety and others where there isn't psychological safety. So there's many different levels of psychological safety, even in different contexts, right? Like maybe within the team there is, but maybe when the PO is in the room, there isn't. Or maybe with the PO there is, but if another stakeholder is in the room, there isn't. Like, we don't know. So first step, we need to identify it. We'll talk about solving it later. So Marc, from your experience and from all the things you've heard from the many Scrum Masters you've worked with, how do I identify at any particular point in time, I'm in the room, something has happened. How do I identify if there isn't psychological safety?
There are the simple things like it's always the same person speaking up, right? And the rest is just silent. You can really feel the psychological safety is not in place. This is one of the things, for example. Of course, if they always look to you that you should now do and say something, is a sign that psychological safety is not in place. Also, when you have your measures at the end of the retrospective and nobody worked on them, for example, sometimes is a sign of psychological safety that is missing. But there are also some checks you can do. You could also ask questions like, likes in the best way anonymous questions, like, are you handled with respect and dignity? I think this is one question. It doesn't matter what race, what religion, whatsoever you are,
or even what personality, because these problems can happen even when everybody's of the same race and religion.
That's true. Or do I have anything I need to do a great job? Do I get anything I need if I ask that I need the following things to do a great job? Could be one question to ask. Is there something? Are you allowed to challenge the status quo, right? Do you have the feeling that on a scale from 1 to 10, all these questions work nice with a scale from 1 to 10. Do you have the feeling that you are allowed to challenge the status quo without the fear of being punished, for example?
Exactly. This is already a great checklist of questions for us to go through and start analyzing, perhaps even in that self-retrospective that we should all be running at the end of the week, or at least regularly, maybe if not at the end of the week, at least, every couple of weeks. And now we need to move on to the, how do we solve it? Okay, we've identified maybe some conditions, or in some contexts and in some cases there isn't psychological safety. Maybe there is in some cases and there isn't in others. And we need to start working as Scrum Masters to solve this, right? So I'm sure you've had this conversation with many of your students. So let's go through this. Like, what are your first tips on how to get started solving the missing psychological safety?
There's a long list of things you can do. They are all part of course, of the Scrum Master Journey in the end. I just noted it down yesterday so that I don't forget anything. For me, something I do with any new team, and which is still one of my favorite tools at all, is personal maps. Because lots of teams, they just know themselves on this working level, right? They don't know each other at the private level, hobbies level, family level, and whatsoever. And it already helps a lot if you really get to know the other people as humans and not just as the coworker. There is somebody sitting in front of you, he's a human too. Sometimes you need something like a personal map to just find out, okay, there's somebody who is also a human and has hobbies and family and stuff like that, which makes it easier to talk to each other sometimes, to talk about this big elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. So just shortly explain, personal maps is just easy. You write your name in the middle, then you have some branches like family, hobbies, education, whatsoever, your goals, your values, and so. Of course, in the online world we currently have, it's easy, just do it on a Miro or mural board, and then you go through these maps. And the idea is that not I as Marc present my map, it's just the other way around. Other people are looking at my map and then asking questions. And so it's not like me, I'm presenting everything. It's more like, what are the interesting aspects of my map? And then people of the team starting asking. And it's about 5 to 7 minutes per person, depends on the size of the team. And then the next person can.
We'll put the link in the show notes. There's even some great tutorials on YouTube about this. But the thing I really like about this is that it brings us back to our roots as entities, as persons, right?
Yes.
And that's a very important aspect in creating camaraderie, alignment, loyalty, right? Like, loyalty is when we want to help our colleagues. And of course, also creating psychological safety. I really like this tool because it is a little bit like a Swiss Army knife of creating teams, right? Like it is about getting people together. And when we get out of that session, we are more of a team than we were when we were getting into the team, right?
Yeah. And at least inside of the team, it makes it a lot easier to feel safe and to talk openly and stuff like that. So this is one of the things I highly recommend. It's easy. It doesn't cost a thing. It just costs some time, and it's a time really well invested.
So give us a quick hit of 2-3 other things that you go to when you want to work on psychological safety. We won't go to a lot of details now, but just to give us a good set of keywords for people to go and search on Google, then we'll go on to the culture problem.
Just maybe two other things is, how do you want to handle conflict in a team? And to really talk about it before you have a conflict. I think conflict is, in some cultures, feels like conflict is something bad. And that's not right. Conflict is something good, because out of conflict, you get different opinions, new ideas come up and stuff like that. So conflict is nothing bad. But maybe before the conflict is there, you have to decide in the team, how do we want to cope with conflict? So what do we do, for example? This is something which is really important. That is also then it's not a high border in between you and the other person to talk about conflict, because you already settled how we want to do it in our team. Could be one way to do it. Also, one thing which is really easy and something we should do is have a clear vision, right?
What do you mean by having a clear vision?
Still, a lot of teams don't have a clear product vision. But self-organization is also about that I can decide if I go left and right. But if I don't know where to go, it's a lot more difficult for me, right? Then I feel like, I don't know if I should really do the step. And then you get fear, and self-organization is again deteriorating. It's really going down and nobody wants to do it. But if it's clear to everyone that we want to go there, then it's a lot easier to take steps and go into self-organization where to go.
Yeah, absolutely. A great tip, by the way. I'll put the link on the show notes for a very detailed facilitation guide for a vision workshop. So if you guys want to check it out, it's free. So just go, and by signing up, you will have immediate access to that e-course.
And I have about 15 other things we can do. So it's
all of which you get by signing up to the Scrum Master Journey, of course. And let's not forget, the URL is scrummaster-journey.com, and the link will also be on the show notes. And of course, we're only giving you the tip of the iceberg of what's inside the Scrum Master Journey, because as Marc said, there's plenty of material to go through over many months and sometimes even years. So, but now let's focus on the culture. The culture is a little bit, I think, for some of us at least, and it was for me when I got started, a little bit like a hydra, right? Like a multi-headed monster, because it's not really easy to define. And when you tackle one aspect, another aspect pops up and becomes quite important. So working with culture, recognizing what the culture is, and then also helping change it becomes one of the key aspects of the work that we do with Scrum Masters. Sometimes it's inside the team, sometimes it's between teams, sometimes it's even with leadership. So let's dive into that aspect, Marc. Explain to us, how do we as Scrum Masters tackle this multi-headed hydra that we call culture?
I think first of all, you have to understand that you can have different cultures in the same company. For example, if I go into production, where we just produce our products in the end, I'm working now lots with companies who don't do only software, right? Really hardware products sometimes. They have a different culture where it's really, of course, you need the process. Of course, you have to be exact and stuff like that. And then you have the area where the innovation is happening, right? Like the innovation department maybe, where you want to be creative without too many processes. And we have a completely different culture. So I think it's really important to understand that you have different cultures in the company, right? This is one thing you should have in hand. Then it's really interesting to find out, for example, if you're in the development department, you want to know what is the culture of the development department. There's a tool I like a lot. It's the business culture design from Dr. Simon Sargmeister is his name. And it's based on spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is, I think, quite famous. He didn't refer to spiral dynamics in his book, but everybody who has some experience know where these colors come from. So the interesting thing is you get in the Scrum Master Journey, you get a questionnaire, you can go through, answer questions, and after that you get a result, what colors you have in the culture, what are the colors that you have a lot, and what are colors that are not that much in your culture. So for example, purple starts always with purple, is the lowest culture color, which is assigned, for example, to clans and tribes. There's some kind of a chief and stuff like that. So really old school culture, for example. For example, if you have a company quite small, maybe a few hundred people, most of the time, this is like the boss is like the tribal chief, and you have this tribe, and other people from outside of your tribe is seen as, oh, who is this? They don't know if he really fits into our culture and stuff like that. But there are red, blue, orange, yellow, green, and aqua cultures a lot. But also here is, you don't have a purple only culture, you don't have a red only culture. It's always a combination of different colors that you see. And it's interesting, what are the most important colors maybe in your area? For example, when you look at the yellow is these companies who are really into science and how to solve problems and stuff like that. And they focus on these things, for example, right? So what are the different colors you have? And this is the first step. You have to find out what is the current culture we have in our company. And from there on, you can start, okay, what should our future culture look like maybe to make a better job, to be more agile maybe? Yeah, what color should be stronger? What should be maybe weakened?
And one aspect of that, which I think is very important, is that, of course, it's not the Scrum Master that does that, right? Like that, there's the work of working with the stakeholders to come to that conclusion, right? So, for example, a very common thing that we can do as Scrum Masters is to share observations. Hey, I've observed that, for example, when we are in a hurry to finish something, everybody listens to Mark and nobody makes decisions anymore. Why is that? Is that how we want things to go forward? And then have that conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, we are there to enable that culture change, not to tell the team or the stakeholders what culture they should have, right?
Right. And then, of course, it's about how do I now work with the culture and how do I change it? And of course, a short disclaimer, this is nothing that works in 2 weeks, right? I know there are a lot of quotes out there like culture eats strategy for breakfast and stuff like that, right? So culture eats anything for breakfast, more or less. Yeah, everything. And that's why it's so important to understand what is the culture. But it's also important that you as a Scrum Master understand, is this a culture I want to stay and live in, right? Or do you find, okay, this is not really the way I would want to work in the future? And maybe this could be also then the base for decision to switch to go somewhere else, maybe. But to work with the culture is if we go now into how to tackle the things here, only shortly, is to make the belief system transparent. So what are the beliefs in your company, the underlying beliefs? Maybe somebody, they're not really talking about them, but they're still there. Because lots of things are happening in the company because of a certain belief, right? And it's the same in your personal area. You have maybe some certain beliefs you learned from your parents or something else, right? And you feel like this is something that is triggering you. And then to work on your belief system, to switch it, is really important. So the thing is, if you have identified some beliefs in your company, then you have to find out, okay, where does this come from? And why is it maybe wrong nowadays? Maybe it was right 20 years ago, if you have a company that's a bit longer on the market already, but maybe it has changed. So why is it wrong now? And how should a new belief look like? So what could be a new belief, quote, be in your company? But to ensure that this new belief can live is what has to happen to support this new belief, that this will be the new belief in your belief system instead of the old one. So there's also lots of work and iterations and experiments and stuff like that. But in my experience, it's the only way to transform a culture over time, to make the belief system transparent and to work with these beliefs in the company.
One other aspect that supports what you just said, right? Like not just finding out what is the belief system, but also then working with leadership to define what's the belief system they would like to have, and then figuring out how to support it. Like one of the key aspects for me is for us as Scrum Masters is to pick the words that support that belief system, because our way of speaking to the team and to the stakeholders will also directly influence culture. Now, of course, if it's just one of us, it's kind of a hard job to change anything, right? But for example, in a group of Scrum Masters, or together with the product owner, or together with the team leadership, starting to focus on that language, like what are the words we want to talk about? And a very good example of that is the very recent, at the point of recording, change towards lean startup, right? Like we started with Agile in late 90s, early 2000, and then somewhere in the early teens, so 2010 to 2015, we started to see a massive shift towards lean startup. And one of the key things that happened was that the language changed. We didn't talk about sprints anymore. We talked about MVPs, or minimum viable products. We didn't talk about time boxes so much anymore. We talked about experiments. We talked a lot more about data. And that language is not only a reflection of the culture, but it's also something that we give back to the company to influence its culture. So that's definitely one of the things we can do with leadership, right? Like together with leadership, we can define, so what's the language we want to hear more often? What are the kind of stories we are looking for? And what's the language associated with that? And how can we start using that language more and more?
Right.
This has been already quite a long deep dive into a how-to of two very common and also very important challenges we face as Scrum Master. That was the self-organization challenge, as well as the culture, how to recognize it, and also how to help it change. But the Scrum Master journey is about a lot more than these two topics, right? So give us a quick overview, Marc, of what can we expect when we go into the Scrum Master journey with you?
Yeah, so the Scrum Master journey consists of 5 journeys in the end. So the first journey is about finding yourself, right? Who I am as a Scrum Master, what are my values? How do I fit in the company? How do we have self-reflection and stuff like that? That's the first part. Second part is really about understanding company culture and adapt it or change it. It's the second part. Third part is then again about self-organization, right? So how do I get more self-organization in my company? How I get the people really out of the goldfish class? Fourth one is how can I really get the potential of everybody in the team out of the person, right? How do I get it out of them? How can I enable people to do a great job? And that's the fourth. And the fifth is, what does agile leadership mean for me as a Scrum Master? Because leadership is not based on hierarchy. Leadership is based on every level, right? So what does it mean for me? How can I use the principles from agile leadership in my work as Scrum Master? And there will be a bonus maybe in the future I'm currently working on. And this is the challenge we currently have, right? These hybrid remote world. So how can I really stay in contact with my team, even though I'm sitting home at my desk with the camera on my face and no real contact with persons, right? This is, I think, one of the biggest struggles we currently have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really a great struggle for Scrum Masters who work through relationships, because now we basically have to schedule relationships into our day. And that's a lot harder.
It is.
For us, specifically for us as Scrum Masters. Of course, it is harder for the team, but most of the work that we do is through other people. And if we can't develop those relationships, it becomes much more difficult. So I'm really, really excited to read and listen and watch the videos that you're going to put out on hybrid remote. Now, many students have gone through this Scrum Master journey, and I know you have some examples of some transformation journeys that have happened with your students. So share some of those with us, Marc.
One of my favorite transformations was from a Scrum Master. He worked in a big corporation, and when we had the first calls, he's also a mentee from in my program. So he has a mentoring program with me, and you could really see in the eyes he is more or less in a burnout state, right? No energy anymore, and so on and so on. And what helped him a lot was especially the first journey, finding about himself. So who I want to be as a Scrum Master. What are my values? Do they fit together with the values we have in this corporation? And no, they didn't. Then he used the Scrum Master Journey community just to find out, okay, where could I maybe go in the future? And if I go on an interview, what could be questions that people can ask me? How can I prepare for these interviews? What can I do maybe beforehand? And now I'm happy that in 1st of March, he will just start a new company, a lot smaller, maybe a little less money as in a corporation, but a lot agile company, really a company who lives agile, who wants to be there. And you can already see, since he quit the job, he's already now happier than before, has more energy than before. And this is really a cool thing for me.
That's a great example of how sometimes as Scrum Masters, we are so focused on the team that we forget about ourselves. And I think that's why it's so critical that we go through that first journey of finding ourselves and really understanding what our values are, what makes us tick, and what kind of role or job or company or context we should look for.
That's true.
So we'll talk more about transformation, what it means to go through the Scrum Master journey, what you can expect, and what are the things that will change in your life as you go through this Scrum Master journey. We'll talk about that in the next episode. The link will be in the show notes for those that are listening to this in the future. Hello from the past. Before we go, though, Marc, where can people find out more about you and perhaps ask you a few more questions?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn. This would be the go-to place at the moment for people just to know more about me. Then, of course, my homepage, marclöffler.eu, is a place. Twitter, I'm quite active. You find me on Twitter also at Marc Löffler, really easy to find. So if you Google for Marc Löffler, I will always be the number one hit. So it's easy to find me.
Absolutely. Marc, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.